The rain pounded against the glass panes as Sharon Anderson stared out the window, her eyes narrowed with rage. Her HOA president, the notorious HOA Karen, Elise Cunningham, was storming up the driveway, her face twisted in fury. Sharon braced herself, knowing the confrontation was inevitable. Just 2 weeks ago, Elise had demanded that Sharon replace her beautiful, hand-carved wooden front door with a generic, cookie-cutter fiberglass model. It's an eyesore and doesn't fit the aesthetic of the neighborhood, Elise had sneered. But Sharon loved that door. It was a family heirloom, painstakingly crafted by her late grandfather. She refused to part with it. Now, Elise was charging up the steps, her high heels clicking against the porch. Sharon steeled her nerves and opened the door, determined not to show any weakness. "What is the meaning of this, Sharon?" Elise spat, her eyes blazing. "I gave you a direct order to replace that hideous door, and you've defied me." Sharon stood her ground. "This door stays. It's a family treasure, and I won't get rid of it just to appease your ridiculous HOA rules." Elise's nostrils flared. "You're in direct violation of the HOA code. If you don't replace that door within a week, I'll have no choice but to levy heavy fines against you." "Go ahead," Sharon replied coolly. "I'm not backing down." With a frustrated growl, Elise spun on her heel and stormed back to her car, her designer purse swinging angrily. Sharon watched her go, feeling a surge of triumphant defiance. But as the rain continued to pelt the windows, Sharon couldn't shake the uneasy feeling that this was far from over. Elise Cunningham was not one to be trifled with. Sure enough, the next day, Sharon's mailbox was stuffed with a stack of certified letters from the HOA, each one threatening steeper fines and even potential legal action if she didn't comply. Panic started to set in. She couldn't afford those kinds of penalties. But the thought of losing her beloved door made her stomach churn. That night, as Sharon lay awake, wrestling with her options, a sudden, thunderous crack made her jump. She rushed to the window just in time to see Elise's prized glass-paneled front door shatter into a million pieces, showered by a barrage of hailstones. Sharon stared in disbelief, her heart pounding. For a moment, she almost felt sorry for Elise. But then a grim realization dawned on her. The HOA president would surely blame her for this. Asterisk. This is bad, asterisk, Sharon thought, her mind racing. Asterisk. This is very, very bad. Asterisk. Sharon's hands trembled as she watched Elise Cunningham hurry outside, frantically trying to salvage what was left of her ruined door. The storm had been relentless, pelting the neighborhood with hail the size of golf balls. Elise's pristine, custom-built home had suffered significant damage, but Sharon knew the HOA president would waste no time in finding someone to blame. Sure enough, Elise's furious gaze soon locked onto Sharon's house. Their eyes met, and Sharon saw the pure hatred burning in Elise's expression. She knew in that moment that her defiance had sealed her fate. Later that day, Sharon's doorbell rang, and she opened it to find Elise flanked by 2 burly men in suits. "Mrs. Anderson," Elise said, her voice dripping with false civility. "I'm afraid I have some very serious matters to discuss with you." Sharon swallowed hard, but tried to keep her composure. "What is it, Elise?" "Well, as you can see, my home suffered significant damage in that dreadful storm," Elise began, her eyes narrowing. "And I have reason to believe that you might be responsible." Sharon's stomach twisted. "What? How could I possibly be responsible for a hailstorm?" Elise's lips curled into a sly smile. "Oh, I don't know. But the timing is certainly convenient, wouldn't you say? You defy my orders to replace your door, and then, lo and behold, my own door is destroyed." "That's absurd," Sharon protested. "You can't possibly think I had something to do with that." "I'm afraid I do," Elise replied calmly. "And these gentlemen are here to escort you to the police station to answer some questions." Sharon's heart raced as the 2 men in suits stepped forward, their expressions unreadable. "On what grounds?" she demanded, her voice trembling. "I haven't done anything wrong." "On the grounds of suspected vandalism and destruction of property," Elise said, a triumphant gleam in her eye. "And I have the full backing of the HOA board to pursue this matter." Sharon's mind whirled as the men grabbed her arms, hauling her out the door. She couldn't believe this was happening. Elise had somehow managed to turn the tables, using the storm as a convenient excuse to frame her. As she was shoved into the back seat of the car, Sharon caught a glimpse of her beloved wooden door, still standing tall and proud. She felt a pang of grief, knowing that she might never see it again. Asterisk, this can't be happening. Asterisk, she thought, her heart pounding. Asterisk, how did it all go so wrong? Asterisk. The ride to the police station was a blur, and Sharon found herself being interrogated by a pair of stern-faced detectives. They grilled her relentlessly, pressing her for any information that might incriminate her. But Sharon maintained her innocence, insisting that she had nothing to do with the damage to Elise's home. She pleaded with the detectives to see reason, to realize that Elise was simply trying to frame her. However, the detectives seemed unconvinced, and Sharon's stomach stank as she realized the gravity of the situation. Elise had the full power of the HOA behind her, and she was not about to let Sharon's defiance go unpunished. As the interrogation dragged on, Sharon felt her hope start to fade. She was trapped in a web of deceit and corruption, and she had no idea how she was going to escape. After hours of grueling interrogation, Sharon was finally released from the police station, but not without a stern warning. The detectives had made it clear that she was still a prime suspect in the vandalism of Ellis Cunningham's home, and that they would be keeping a close eye on her. As she trudged back to her car, Sharon's mind was reeling. How had Elise managed to turn the tables so completely? The HOA president had clearly orchestrated this entire scenario, using the storm as a convenient excuse to frame Sharon for her own property damage. Sharon's hands clenched into fists as she realized the full extent of Elise's deception. The HOA was a corrupt, powerful entity, and Elise was its ruthless leader. She would stop at nothing to maintain her control over the neighborhood, even if it meant destroying an innocent person's life. With a heavy heart, Sharon returned home, her beloved wooden door still standing tall and defiant. But she knew that it wouldn't be long before Elise made her next move. Sure enough, the next day, Sharon's mailbox was overflowing with more threatening letters from the HOA. The fines were now in the thousands of dollars, and the warnings of potential legal action had become even more dire. Sharon's stomach churned as she read through the documents, her hands shaking. She couldn't afford these penalties, not with her already tight budget, and she knew that Elise would never back down until she had broken her. Desperate, Sharon decided to reach out to her neighbors, hoping to rally some support against the HOA's tyranny. But to her dismay, most of them were too afraid to speak out against Elise and her cronies. "She'll ruin us if we defy her," one of her neighbors, a meek-looking man named Mr. Wilkins, confessed. "We can't risk it, not with our homes and our livelihoods on the line." Sharon felt her heart sink. She was truly on her own in this battle, with no one to turn to for help. As the days passed, the pressure only mounted. The HOA continued to bombard Sharon with threats and demands, each one more vicious than the last. Elise seemed to take delight in her torment, taunting her with smug, condescending phone calls. "You know, Sharon, I'm a very generous person," Elise had purred during one of their conversations. "If you just agree to replace that door, I might be willing to drop the fines. But if you continue to defy me, I'm afraid the consequences will be severe." Sharon had slammed the phone down, her hands trembling with rage and fear. She knew that Elise was not bluffing, and that she would stop at nothing to crush her. With her savings rapidly dwindling and the threat of legal action looming, Sharon felt cornered. She had never imagined that a simple dispute over a door could escalate into such a high-stakes, cinematic power struggle. But as she looked out at her cherished wooden door, she knew that she couldn't give in. This was more than just a battle over aesthetics. It was a fight for her pride, her independence, and her very right to exist in her own home. I won't back down. Sharon told herself, steeling her resolve. I can't let Elise win. With a newfound determination, she began to formulate a plan. A way to outmaneuver the corrupt HOA and regain control of her own life. It would be a risky, high-stakes gamble, but she had no other choice. The stage was set for an epic showdown, and Sharon was determined to come out on top. As the pressure from the HOA continued to mount, Sharon knew she needed to act fast. Elise and her cronies were clearly hell-bent on breaking her, and she couldn't afford to let them win. After much deliberation, Sharon came up with a bold, high-stakes plan. She would fight fire with fire. She would use the HOA's own tactics against them. First, she meticulously combed through the HOA's bylaws, searching for any loopholes or technicalities that she could exploit. It was a tedious and painstaking process, but Sharon was determined to find a weakness in the system. Finally, after days of poring over the dense legal documents, she stumbled upon something that caught her eye. A clause that allowed homeowners to appeal HOA decisions if they could prove that the decision was made in bad faith or with malicious intent. Sharon's heart raced as she read and reread the passage, her mind whirring with possibilities. If she could prove that Elise and the HOA were deliberately targeting her, she might just have a chance at overturning the fines and the threats of legal action. Without wasting a moment, Sharon set to work, gathering evidence and building her case. She scoured her past interactions with Elise, looking for any indication of the HOA president's true motives. And as she pieced together the puzzle, a chilling pattern began to emerge. Elise's demands had always been targeted and selective, seemingly aimed at homeowners who dared to defy her. And the fines and penalties she levied were often disproportionate and seemingly arbitrary. It was clear that the HOA was being used as a tool of oppression, with Elise at the helm. Armed with this damning evidence, Sharon filed a formal appeal with the HOA board, challenging the validity of their actions. She knew that it was a risky move. Elise and her cronies would undoubtedly fight tooth and nail to maintain their grip on power, but she was determined to see it through. The hearing was tense and heated, with Elise doing her best to discredit Sharon's claims. But Sharon stood her ground, methodically presenting her evidence and making a compelling case for the board's corruption. As the hours wore on, Sharon could see the uncertainty creeping into the faces of the HOA board members. They were clearly unsettled by the weight of the evidence Sharon had presented, and Sharon could sense their discomfort with the idea of being complicit in Elise's abuses of power. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the board announced their decision. To Sharon's astonishment, they had ruled in her favor, ordering the HOA to rescind all fines and penalties against her. Elise's face was a mask of pure fury as she stormed out of the room, her designer heels clicking against the floor. Sharon couldn't help but feel a sense of triumph, knowing that she had outmaneuvered the corrupt HOA president. But as she left the hearing, Sharon couldn't shake the feeling that this was far from over. Elise was not the kind of person to take a defeat lying down, and Sharon knew that the HOA would stop at nothing to reassert its dominance. This is just the beginning, Sharon thought, her stomach churning with dread. The real battle is yet to come. The victory against the HOA was short-lived, as Sharon soon discovered. Within days of the hearing, Elise had launched a relentless campaign to undermine Sharon's success. First, the HOA began issuing a series of new, seemingly arbitrary rules and regulations, each one more absurd than the last. Homeowners were fined for the slightest infractions, and Sharon knew that Elise was deliberately targeting those who had sided with her during the appeal. Then, the HOA board members who had ruled in Sharon's favor started to receive threatening phone calls and anonymous letters. Some even reported finding their property vandalized in the dead of night. It was clear that Elise was willing to play dirty, using fear and intimidation to force the board members into submission. As the pressure mounted, several of the board members caved, resigning from their positions and leaving Elise with a compliant, hand-picked team that would do her bidding without question. Sharon watched in horror as the HOA's stranglehold on the neighborhood tightened. Elise had managed to consolidate her power, and she was now wielding it with an iron fist. Desperate, Sharon started reaching out to local officials and media outlets, hoping to expose the HOA's corruption and bring Elise's reign of terror to an end. But to her dismay, she encountered a wall of silence and indifference. The HOA is a private organization, one city council member told her. There's nothing we can do unless there's clear evidence of illegal activity. Sharon's frustration boiled over. But there is evidence. Elise is using the HOA to terrorize and extort us. The council member shrugged. Unless you can prove it in a court of law, our hands are tied. Feeling defeated, Sharon retreated back to her home, her beloved wooden door a silent witness to her struggle. She knew that she was running out of options, and that Elise was closing in for the kill. Then, one night, as Sharon was lying awake, she heard a strange noise coming from outside. Cautiously, she peered out the window and gasped in horror. Elise and a group of her HOA enforcers were gathered in her driveway surrounding her car. Before Sharon could react, she watched in dismay as they began slashing the tires and smashing the windows. She rushed outside, her heart pounding, but the HOA goons quickly overpowered her. Elise stood by, a smug grin on her face. "I warned you, Sharon," she hissed. "This is what happens when you defy me." Sharon struggled against the men's grip, her anger and desperation boiling over. "You're a monster, Elise. You can't keep getting away with this." Elise's eyes narrowed. "Oh, but I can. And I will. This neighborhood is mine, and no one, not even you, is going to take that away from me." With a flick of her hand, she signaled for the men to release Sharon. "Clean up this mess," she ordered, before turning and strutting back to her car. Sharon watched in dismay as her car was towed away, the HOA goons leaving her driveway in a cloud of exhaust. She felt utterly helpless, her last shred of hope slipping away. Asterisk, how could this be happening? Asterisk, she thought, sinking to her knees. Asterisk, I've lost everything. Asterisk. As the reality of her situation sank in, Sharon couldn't help but wonder if she had made a terrible mistake in challenging the corrupt HOA. Elise had proven to be a formidable and ruthless adversary, and Sharon was starting to doubt whether she had the strength to continue the fight. But as she looked up at her wooden door, a glimmer of determination flickered in her eyes. She refused to let Elise win. This was her home, her family's legacy, and she would do whatever it took to protect it. With her car destroyed and her savings dwindling from the constant onslaught of HOA fines, Sharon knew she was running out of options. Elise and her minions had firmly tightened their grip on the neighborhood, and Sharon felt completely trapped. But she refused to give up. This was her home, her family's legacy, and she would be damned if she let Elise and the corrupt HOA take it all away. Determined to find a way to turn the tables, Sharon began to dig deeper, searching for any weakness or vulnerability she could exploit. She scoured old records, pored over legal documents, and even managed to get her hands on some incriminating information of the HOA's financial dealings. As the days turned into weeks, Sharon pieced together a startling picture of Elise's manipulations. The HOA president had been siphoning off funds for her own personal use, funneling money into shell companies and offshore accounts. It was a web of deceit and corruption that ran deep. Armed with this explosive evidence, Sharon knew she had to act quickly. She couldn't risk Elise finding out about her investigation and silencing her for good. One night, as the neighborhood lay sleeping, Sharon crept out to her car, a rental she had secured after her own vehicle had been destroyed, and headed to the local news station. She knew that exposing the HOA's misdeeds to the public was her best, and perhaps only, chance at toppling Elise's reign of terror. The reporters were initially skeptical, but as Sharon laid out the damning evidence, their eyes widened with shock and disbelief. They realized that this was a story that could rock the entire community, and they wasted no time in launching a full-scale investigation. Within days, the news of the HOA's corruption was splashed across the front pages of the local newspapers, and the story quickly gained national attention. Suddenly, Elise and her cronies were on the defensive, scrambling to contain the damage. But Sharon knew that this was only the beginning of the battle. Elise was a formidable adversary, and she would not go down without a fight. Sure enough, the HOA president soon launched a counterattack, flooding the media with statements denying the allegations and accusing Sharon of fabricating the evidence. She even went so far as to file a defamation lawsuit against the news station, hoping to silence them and discredit Sharon once and for all. The legal battle that ensued was intense and grueling, with both sides pouring every resource they had into the fight. Sharon watched in trepidation as her savings dwindled, and she feared that Elise's deep pockets and high-powered lawyers would ultimately prevail. But just when it seemed like all hope was lost, a new ally emerged. A tenacious investigative journalist who had been following the story closely. She had uncovered even more damning evidence of the HOA's misdeeds, and she was determined to bring Elise and her cronies to justice. Together, Sharon and the journalist worked tirelessly, piecing together the puzzle and building an airtight case against the corrupt HOA. They exposed the financial irregularities, the intimidation tactics, and the web of lies that Elise had spun to maintain her power. As the trial unfolded, the public's outrage grew, and the pressure on the HOA mounted. Elise and her associates found themselves on the defensive, their carefully constructed facade of respectability crumbling before their eyes. And in the end, justice prevailed. The court ruled in Sharon's favor, ordering the HOA to be dissolved and all of its assets seized. Elise and her co-conspirators were sentenced to lengthy prison terms, their dreams of absolute power shattered. As Sharon stood in the ruins of her beloved wooden door, now repaired and restored, she couldn't help but feel a sense of triumph. She had survived the HOA's wrath, emerging victorious from a high-stakes power struggle that had threatened to destroy her. But as she looked around at the now liberated neighborhood, she knew that the real work was just beginning. The healing process would be long and difficult, but she was determined to rebuild, to reclaim what had been stolen from them all. The fall of the corrupt HOA sent shockwaves through the community, and in the aftermath, Sharon found herself thrust into an unexpected role, that of a neighborhood hero. As the news of Elise and her cronies' downfall spread, Sharon was inundated with messages of gratitude and admiration from her fellow homeowners. They had been living under the HOA's oppressive thumb for years, too afraid to speak out, and Sharon's courageous stand had given them the courage to finally fight back. Suddenly, Sharon found herself at the center of a grassroots movement to rebuild and reinvent the neighborhood. Neighbors who had once been too afraid to even make eye contact with each other now banded together, determined to reclaim their community and restore it to its former glory. With the HOA dissolved, the first order of business was to address the damage that had been done. Homes that had been neglected or vandalized were repaired, and the streets were cleaned up. The piles of litter and debris that had accumulated over the years finally cleared away. But the real challenge lay in healing the emotional scars left by Elise's reign of terror. Many homeowners were still wary, unwilling to trust anyone in a position of authority, and Sharon knew that rebuilding that trust would be an uphill battle. Undeterred, she set out to bring the community together, organizing block parties, neighborhood watch programs, and even a community garden initiative. Slowly but surely, the neighbors began to open up, sharing their stories of hardship and finding solace in the knowledge that they were no longer alone. As the months passed, the neighborhood began to transform, both physically and emotionally. The once dreary streets were now lined with vibrant flower gardens and the laughter of children playing in the parks. and the sense of community, long lost, was slowly being restored. Sharon watched it all unfold with a bittersweet sense of pride. She had fought so hard to protect her home, never imagining that her actions would inspire such a profound change. But as she surveyed the transformed landscape, she couldn't help but feel a deep sense of satisfaction. Yet, even as the neighborhood flourished, Sharon couldn't shake the nagging feeling that Elise was still out there, biding her time, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The former HOA president had been sentenced to a lengthy prison term, but Sharon knew that her reach extended far beyond the walls of her cell. Determined to keep her neighbors safe, Sharon began to quietly investigate Elise's associates, searching for any signs of their continued involvement in the neighborhood's affairs. She knew that she couldn't let her guard down, not when so much was at stake. And then, one day, her worst fears were realized. A series of mysterious fires broke out across the community, each one targeting the homes of those who had been most vocal in their opposition to the HOA. The damage was extensive, and Sharon's heart sank as she realized that Elise's long arm of retribution had found its way into the neighborhood once again. As the investigation into the fires unfolded, Sharon found herself at the center of the storm, her own home becoming a target of the arsonists. She knew that Elise was behind it all, and that she would stop at nothing to exact her revenge. With the authorities struggling to contain the crisis, Sharon knew that she had to take matters into her own hands. She couldn't let Elise's reign of terror continue, not when the hard-won peace of the neighborhood was at stake. Steeling her resolve, Sharon made a decision that would change the course of the conflict forever. She was going to confront Elise, to put an end to the cycle of fear and destruction once and for all. As the neighborhood was gripped by the ongoing crisis of the mysterious fires, Sharon knew that she had to act quickly. Elise's long reach had once again infiltrated the community, and she was determined to put an end to the former HOA president's reign of terror. Undeterred by the threats and the mounting danger, Sharon reached out to her newfound allies. The tenacious investigative journalist who had played a pivotal role in exposing the HOA's corruption, as well as a group of her most trusted neighbors. Together, they hatched a plan. A bold, high-stakes gambit that would bring them face-to-face with Elise and her associates, with the aim of finally putting an end to the conflict once and for all. With the authorities stretched thin and struggling to contain the arson crisis, Sharon and her team knew that they would have to rely on their own wits and resourcefulness to succeed. They meticulously planned their operation, anticipating every possible contingency and leaving nothing to chance. As the day of the confrontation arrived, Sharon's heart raced with a mixture of fear and determination. She knew that she was putting everything on the line, but the thought of Elise continuing to terrorize the neighborhood was simply unacceptable. When the moment of truth arrived, Sharon and her team sprung into action, converging on Elise's hideout, a secluded, heavily guarded compound on the outskirts of the neighborhood. The confrontation was intense and chaotic, with both sides refusing to back down. Elise, her eyes blazing with fury, hurled insults and threats at Sharon, desperate to regain the upper hand. But Sharon refused to be cowed, meeting Elise's aggression with unwavering resolve. As the battle raged on, Sharon's team gradually gained the upper hand, outmaneuvering Elise's henchmen and gradually closing in on the former HOA president. And just when it seemed like they had finally gained the upper hand, a shocking twist unfolded. Elise, her back against the wall, unleashed a chilling revelation. She had enlisted the help of a shadowy organization, one with deep pockets and a ruthless agenda, to help her maintain her grip on the neighborhood. This new threat, she warned, would stop at nothing to crush any and all opposition. Sharon's heart sank as she realized the true scope of Elise's machinations. The former HOA president had been playing a game on a much larger scale, one that threatened to consume the entire community. But in the face of this new, formidable challenge, Sharon refused to back down. She rallied her team, urging them to dig deeper, to uncover the truth and expose the full extent of Elise's web of corruption. The battle that followed was intense and grueling, with both sides trading blows and refusing to yield. But as the dust settled, Sharon and her team emerged victorious, having finally succeeded in bringing Elise and her shadowy allies to justice. In the aftermath, the neighborhood breathed a collective sigh of relief. The weight of Elise's oppression finally lifted. But as Sharon stood amidst the rubble, she couldn't help but feel a sense of bittersweet triumph. The fight had been long and arduous, and the scars it had left would take time to heal. But as she looked around at the transformed community, she knew that it had all been worth it. This was her home, her legacy, and she had fought with every fiber of her being to protect it. And in the end, she had emerged victorious, proving that even the mightiest of HOA Karens could be toppled by the unwavering determination of a single homeowner. As Sharon closed the door to her beloved wooden door, now restored to its former glory, she couldn't help but smile. The battle may have been won, but the war for the soul of the neighborhood was far from over, and she was ready to continue the fight, one step at a time.